Tolliver is here. Okay. We'll start the meeting in 2 minutes, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Commission on Chicago Landmarks for today, December 3rd. This is a virtual meeting. And let me start with that roll call. When I call your name, please indicate that you can hear me and see me. Commissioner Burns.
I can hear and see you and present.
Commissioner Yekovich.
I can hear and see you, present.
Commissioner Hughes. Commissioner Hughes. Okay, let's wait for Commissioner Hughes. I know that she's here. Commissioner Cox.
Present, I can hear you and see you.
Commissioner Tolliver.
Present, I can hear and see you.
And let me go back to Commissioner Hughes.
Present, I can hear and see you. Thank you.
I'm Rafael Leon, I'm the chairman, and we have a quorum. Is Commissioner Osman here? No. Okay. All right. So let's start the meeting. Earlier this year, Governor Pritzker signed Public Act 101-0640, making certain amendments to the Open Meetings Act so that we, along with other boards and commissions, can continue to host virtual meetings during the COVID-19 public health emergency, provided that certain conditions are met. One of those conditions is that I, as head of the Commission on Chicago Landmarks, determined that an in-person meeting of the Commission on Chicago Landmarks and its Permit Review Committee are not practical or prudent. I want to make sure our virtual meetings meets all the conditions of the Open Meetings Act as amended. Therefore, I'm making a determination pursuant to Section 7E2 of the Open Meetings Act that an in-person meeting of this Commission on Chicago Landmarks and its Permit Review Committee is not practical or prudent at this time. Similarly, I'm also making a determination pursuant to Section 7E5 that because of the disaster as declared by the governor, it is unfeasible for at least one member of the Commission on Chicago Landmarks or its chief administrative officer or its chief legal officer to be physically present at the meeting place for either meeting, in as much as there is no physical meeting at this time. Pursuant to a resolution adopted by the Commission on Chicago Landmarks on June 4th, 2020, regarding the chairman's emergency rulemaking powers, I issued emergency rules governing the conduct of remote public commission meetings and provisions for remote public participation. That was effective June 23rd, 2020, and this was in response to the COVID-19 emergency. These rules were posted on the Commission's website. In line with these emergency rules today's regular commission meeting is a virtual meeting being simulcast to the general public via live stream. Commission meetings have been held virtually since May of this year. Meetings are structured to minimize the chances for technical difficulties. Members of the general public have been encouraged to submit written statements in advance of the meeting, and these have been posted on the Commission's website and are available for public view during the virtual meeting. Members of the public desiring to speak at today's meeting were required to register before the meeting, and verbal statements by the public for all agenda items will take place at the beginning of the meeting. Applicants and their representatives, as well as aldermen, were asked to contact staff if they desired to speak, and they will be able to do so after the staff presentation on a specific subject. 9 members of the general public signed up to speak as of the deadline of 12:45 on Tuesday, December 1st, and were provided instructions regarding on how to do so. I'm going to call upon these people now. All that everybody who have signed up to speak on the agenda are primarily for item number 3. Let me also indicate that item number 5 is been deferred at the request of the applicant. So item number 3 is the preliminary landmark designation of the hosted Willow Group. Please limit your statements to 3 minutes. Begin by stating your name and the association you represent, if any, for the record. May we hear from Diane Gonzalez. Ms. Gonzalez.
Good afternoon. My name is Diane Gonzalez. I'm a member of the Old Town Triangle Historic District Committee, and I am speaking on behalf of our committee, as well as hoping that you will support the designation of this district. In the late 1800s, Chicago's North Side was home to many German immigrants who were small businessmen and craftsmen, as you all well know, and the shops and workspaces were often on the ground level with space above for living quarters. Particularly looking at Halsted and Willow, we think of 1 block north when there were Dickens and Armitage horse cars looping around there. And so this really did develop as an important public transportation area, which resulted in all these shops and offices, shall we call them, being important then with the residential above. In fact, one of them even had a public meeting hall on the 3rd floor. And I like to think of the Old Town Triangle, in those days, German immigrants making their way over for meetings to Halsted Willow, this important gateway. And I do think that these buildings are architecturally significant when we talk about the Italianate and the Queen Anne, but also just socially and historically. And we are so fortunate that this intersection has survived pretty much intact. When you look at some of the surrounding blocks, they're vastly altered or even have structures that are long since gone from today. So I just ask you all to please consider voting approval of this important gateway, which is pretty much priceless and is an important designation to preserve for Chicago's history. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. Can we hear from Chuck Griffin? Mr. Griffin?
Sorry about that. I had to unmute my microphone. Good afternoon. My name is Chuck Griffin. I am a longtime Lincoln Park property owner, a member of the Ranch Triangle Board, and currently Ranch Planning Chair. While much of our community is listed in the National Register of Historic Places, as you know, that distinction has no legal protection. The fight to preserve neighborhood character has continued for decades, with each new generation of residents defending the environment they inherited. In 2014, real estate developer Golub & Company bought 22 parcels in the area and proposed tearing down 1800 North Halsted, also known as the Black Duck Building, as well as several adjacent buildings. Their plan was extreme. It would have towered above the predominantly 2- and 3-story landscape of the street. They wanted a 7-story structure. We sat in shock in our meeting with Golub, as they said our neighborhood didn't fit in anymore, that we needed to link up to the high rises and commercial towers to the south. We knew this reasoning was wrong. It ignored the value and appeal of our area, the importance of the Black Duck building, and the important role that the corner of Halsted and Willow plays as a break from the commercial corridor and as a gateway to our neighborhood. Luckily, Golub sold the majority of its holdings. In 2016, the new owner, Larimar, turned out to be a respectful and enlightened neighbor. They were receptive to maintaining the buildings without disqualifying them from possible future landmarking protection. I also want to mention the strong support we have received from longtime business owner Dan Allen, who has successfully operated a building in the Black Duck building for more than 20 years. Dan is not only a business stakeholder, but a homeowner in the area, and credits some of his success to the building itself, first opening the Black Duck and now his newly named Willow Room. So we are here today, hopeful and grateful to the many people, including our aldermen, our fellow neighbors, and the city, all of whom have helped in these efforts. But we are also keenly aware that without protection, the history, the charm, and importance of this collection of buildings will be lost. Thank you for your consideration of the Halsted Willow Group.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Can we hear from Diane Levine?
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Diane Levin. I'm speaking as a longtime homeowner and resident of the area, a former member of the Ranch Triangle Community Association Board, and as former chair of the Ranch Planning Committee. I think today is an opportunity to cement the efforts of a real estate giant in our city's history. The seeds of preserving this corner were sown long ago by legendary Chicagoan, the late John Baird. A member of the Chicago Commission on Landmarks for over 40 years, Mr. Baird's vision for the DePaul area demanded that the character of the community survive, even as he fueled its physical redevelopment. Mr. Baird played a key role in transforming Greater DePaul, but for today, most significantly, he preserved the structures at the intersection of Halsted and Willow. Mr. Baird believed that linking or vintage buildings retain a sense of place and identity sorely needed in our urban environments today. He intentionally left the Black Duck at 1800 North Halsted and the Vinci Building at 1732 totally intact to provide visual and historical context. It was a selection and an indication of the awakening landmark movement and eventually our landmark ordinance enacted in 1968 in our city that governed Chicago today. John Baird knew architectural identity would be essential to the enduring popularity of DePaul, as well as our entire city. Lynn Osmond, now a distinguished member of this commission, once said as CEO in her role as Chicago Architecture Foundation president, Mr. Baird, we have him to thank today because John recognized the value of keeping so many buildings intact and existent as part of Chicago's built environment. So it follows that in order to thrive, urban communities must continue to attract the investment and the commitment of future residents, property owners, business owners who are drawn to Chicago's recognizable, established, and historical neighborhoods and its timeless architecture. This is what motivated John Baird for over 30 years, and it should guide all of us today, especially those entrusted with the physical stewardship of our city. I believe Mr. Baird would be proud to see formal protections extended to the buildings he nurtured and saved. He would be heartened to know this historic commercial intersection will remain a link, evoking a sense of place for us and all those who continue to live, work, and enjoy the community.
Thank you, Ms. Levin. May I hear from Ann Moore, please?
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name's Ann Moore. I chair the Zoning and Planning Committee of Lincoln Central Association. Lincoln Central is one of 6 neighborhood groups in Lincoln Park established in 1958. Along with Ranch Triangle Association, we instigated the landmarking of this urban gateway several years ago when these buildings were threatened with demolition by a developer who would have raised the block to make way for big box retail. So why should these buildings be saved? When built, these retail establishments, quote, provided everyday shopping within easy walking distance. And they still do. Think about it, these buildings from 1880 to 1889, 140 years ago, they continue to house businesses that serve locals and visitors. These are thriving businesses, even during a pandemic. My point is this, we're not asking to landmark something obsolete. These are vibrant buildings that hold restaurants at street level and apartments above. Walkability may be the key to Lincoln Park. While the side streets are residential, the commercial streets offer national and local retailers, world-class restaurants, grocery stores, dry cleaners, sandwich shops, theaters. I've lived in this neighborhood for 35 years and do almost all of my errands on foot. It's no surprise that our neighborhood is attractive to families and empty nesters. These are people who trade a backyard and a driveway for the convenience of shops and cultural attractions within walking distance. This is city living at its best. How interesting then to find the same kind of living described in the report we commissioned. Quote, during the 19th century, Chicago developed as a series of tightly organized and built neighborhoods. Quote, most shop near their homes. Quote, these local shopping districts were composed of buildings that typically fit the scale of their surrounding residential neighborhoods. The 19th century brick buildings that comprise the Willow Halsted Gateway are the patina of Lincoln Park. They provide a sense of place. Their scale is consistent with the adjoining residential areas. These mixed-use buildings exemplify Lincoln Park and serve as a bookend to the historic Armitage Halsted District, which is at the next intersection to the north. Every Lincoln Park neighborhood group, Mid-North, Old Town, Park West, Ranch Triangle, Sheffield Neighbors, supports this application. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Willow Halsted Gateway. I urge you to support this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Deirdre Graciano signed up to testify. However, she has asked that her 3 minutes be ceded to Ann Mickey. So may we hear from Ann Mickey? Ms. Mickey, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. My name is Ann Mickey, and I am the granddaughter of Matt Schulian, whose business was at 1800 North Halsted. In the interest of time, I'd like to share a story with you that I wrote 5 years ago, and I think the story will tell you what I'd like you to hear. My mom's turning 90 this Christmas Eve. While her short-term memory is dissipating, her long-term memory, at least that of the things that were meaningful in her life, seems to get clearer. Of late, she frequently shares fragments of her lively and colorful childhood past, tales of her childhood home that she refers to as 1800. Recently, I read somewhere that the developers were going to buy the building and tear it down, and she's been hankering to get there ever since. Just need to see it one more time, so we took a trip. Mom often talked about life at 1800, a modest 3-story building at the northwest corner of Halsted and Willow. It was more than an apartment she grew up in. The first floor was her father's saloon, the second floor their family home, an apartment where she, her parents, and 4 siblings lived. The third floor, a large hallway with a stage, her own private stage, where she could pretend to be Shirley Temple. This, however, she never knew existed until she was 8. Before that, she said, that and the basement were strictly off limits. She smiled and said, yeah, You know, Dad was making booze on the 3rd floor and selling it in the basement, which was a speakeasy. On the drive over, she reminisced about how literally magical that building was. It was a roaring, vibrant, lively place where her larger-than-life father, Matt Julian, held court with his patrons, often leaving them in fits of laughter over a great joke or grandiose prank. My grandfather died when I was 13. I remember him well, but I wasn't old enough to know him the way you would if you were sitting at the bar drinking a martini. To hear Mom and the stories of 1800, wherever Grandpa was, there was a trail of laughter. He had a way of captivating people without even knowing it, almost leaving them spellbound with his card tricks and mesmerized with a great story. Mom told me 1800s was where it all started for Grandpa, and while it was fun for most who frequented, it wasn't always the best of times for him. There was Prohibition, a brief stint in jail, and then the Great Depression, but his passion for people, card tricks, a good cocktail, and life prevailed. Back to our field trip, we got to 1800 and she was hell-bent on getting in. By the grace of God, some workers were in there. They let us in, and upon entering, I realized it wasn't being torn down at all, but in fact made into a new restaurant. We got back in the car. Mom was quiet and looked straight ahead. Tear rolled down her cheek and she said, with a huge smile on her face, "See, they know how great that place is. They know about the fun, the laughter, the good times, and all the fabulous things that happened between those walls. Annie, let's make a reservation." In spending time with Mom, I've had the privilege of seeing life through the eyes of a 90-year-old woman. Her memory bank only holds space for important, meaningful things that have shaped her life. They're not cars, houses, or trinkets that Dad bought. What she remembers quite vividly and holds far more precious are the people, family, and friends and amazing stories of her very rich childhood and life at 1800. I say bravo to the Lincoln Park Preservation Alliance for your diligent efforts to keep this shrine or monument to my grandfather and his passion for life, love, and people still standing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mickey. Nice story. Thank you very much for sharing that story. Can we hear from John Tooley, please?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is John Tully. I've lived in the 43rd Ward my entire adult life, specifically within, say, 2 to 6 blocks of the subject intersection. Unfortunately, all of the Victorian era apartments in which I resided in my 20s and 30s have been demolished. That includes in the 1800 blocks of Fremont, just to the west of this intersection, and on Howe Street immediately to the east. Now, I'm an attorney by profession, and as the years have gone by, I've grown increasingly frustrated by how little of what I do is beautiful or even true. In my job as a commercial litigator, I'd typically be filing some kind of injunction against this very designation on behalf of a building owner who would claim, with little basis, I'd say, that he or she couldn't possibly live with the landmark status. I've tried to channel some of that frustration of late by trying my hand at historic preservation, both formally and informally. For example, I went back to graduate school at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in 2014 to get a master's degree in historic preservation. That's where I first met the late Terry Tatum, who authored this designation report. The report had its genesis in part as a draft designation, or at least snippets of that I did for Terry's class. And until that class, I certainly hadn't known that my neighborhood was in the heart of a National Register district, but I now know, as others have touched on, that didn't prevent all of the demolition I referenced earlier. But somehow this intersection did survive, including substantial blight after World War II and into the 70s. What we've lost in and around Willow and Halstead is the fabric of the area that drew residents and businesses here in the first place, and not just the bricks and mortar. Terry's report touches on this too. We risk losing the memory of some of the residents, their cultures, and their traditions. We kind of throw up our hands and just say that the blocks in and around this area have been lost. But I urge the commission and ultimately the city council to do something that is beautiful, that is true, and grant the proposed landmark district. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tolley, and thank you for not litigating this designation. We appreciate that. May we now hear from Joseph Cranford?
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to speak about the cultural history of one of the buildings being considered for this landmark status. My name is Joey Cranford. I'm the co-owner and CEO of the Chicago Magic Lounge. In the early 1900s, the era of grand stage illusions, household names like Houdini, Thurston, and Chicago's own Harry Blackstone were entertaining thousands with their massive illusion shows all over the country. However, in Chicago, the magician was starting to change. For the first time ever, the magician was someone you could talk to, laugh with, drink with, and be fooled by right at your own table. It was the beginning of what is known as Chicago-style close-up magic, and it all began at 1800 North Halsted at a little place called Schulian's. Now, most Chicagoans don't know about the history of magic, much less that there is such a thing as Chicago-style magic. But in the same way Chicago's had influence on blues, comedy, and even pizza, the art of magic and the way it was performed was changed forever when Matt Schulian sat down with his customers at the restaurant and put on a show up close and personal. Now, soon Matt's card tricks would become famous across the country, and some of the other magicians who would perform at Schulian's would eventually land their own spot performing elsewhere at other nightlife spots in Chicago. Some magicians began opening their own magic bars in the area, and this trend would continue into the 70s and 80s all over the Chicagoland area, totaling up to 15 bars and restaurants that all focused on close-up magic. Then it began to spread nationally. Magic bars began popping up all over the country in the 80s and 90s as one person would teach the other this specific way of performing. Students of the Chicago style opened bars across the country, and today there are magic bars in Spain and France and England, and a huge magic scene in Japan. Now, there's not a lot left of the old magic bars in Chicago, but the last original one that was left was Schulian's. It would move locations, finally close down around 1999. But the Schulians, the story of them, it's the bookends of a history of magic. And then most people don't know about it. And the most important thing to me is that what began on this corner over 100 years ago has brought joy and laughter and amazement to generations of people all over the world. And it's even come back home to us here at the Chicago Magic Lounge, where we get to share in this rich history of magic. And I believe that Chicago and the entire magic community all across the world would be honored to have Matt's legacy remembered, and the entire building remembered as a birthplace, the ground zero of close-up magic as it's performed today in bars and restaurants all over the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Cranford. Can we hear from Lisa Dijana?
Good afternoon, commissioners.
Good afternoon.
This is Lisa DiChiara, Director of Advocacy for Landmarks Illinois. In 2013, we were first alerted to the development proposal that's been referred to by several people here already by Golub that threatened to demolish 1800 North Halsted, the northwest corner of Halsted and Willow. At that point, Landmarks Illinois embarked on a collaborative multi-year advocacy effort with Lincoln Central and Ranch Triangle and Alderman Michelle Smith and many citizens such as John Tully, who spoke earlier, who have all been extremely concerned about this intersection and all the buildings at all corners of the intersection, because they've always viewed it as a very important visual gateway to the Sheffield neighborhood. And knowing that large-scale development would continue to be a major pressure on this intersection early on, starting in 2013 and 2014, we started to discuss the need to do a landmark designation. We included the buildings on our most endangered historic places list in 2014. And in 2018, finally, after much more study and discussions with the community and led by the alderwoman, we gave a grant to the Lincoln Central organization to help fund the designation report that is in front of you today, authored by Terry Tatum. We really want to acknowledge Lincoln Central, Ranch Triangle, and the Alderwoman for also financially contributing toward that designation report. Again, it just shows the commitment of the community organizations to make sure that this important intersection is protected. And while clearly 1800 North Halsted, the former Black Duck, and Schulian's Tavern is the most famous amongst the group of buildings you're looking at here today, clearly all of the buildings in the proposed designation are extremely important. And we want to note all of them have a very high level of integrity and absolutely deserve designation and protection. And we thank Larimar, Dan Allen, and also the owners of the two buildings at the southeast corner for preserving these buildings and retaining their integrity. We support this designation wholeheartedly and hope you will as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Can we hear from Ward Miller, please?
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. I'm Ward Miller, Executive Director of Preservation Chicago. And we at Preservation Chicago fully support the Chicago landmark designation of the Willow Halsted District of 4 buildings. These 4 structures tell a visual story and history of the development of buildings along Halsted Street and a commercial corridor in Lincoln Park. It is a history relating to the German-American community on Chicago's north side, and also gives some insight into Lincoln Park's history during the last decades of the 19th century. Each of the 4 structures is a finely crafted building, from the Neeson building housing Vinci Restaurant, constructed in 1889, to the twin buildings, the Zuber and Gespitz drugstore buildings, both circa 1880. Also, Hammerstrom's Hall, also known as the Schulian's building, built as a combination storefront, apartment, and social hall and dating to 1883, which was once a prominent building type and is becoming more and more rare, as so many of these social halls and meeting hall buildings have been lost to time. These structures, situated at the corner of Will and Halsted Street, are remarkable in character and define a gateway to the commercial district beyond, including the Armitage Halsted Chicago Landmark District to the north. Urban renewal efforts of the 1960s and 1970s left much of the commercial streets to the south of this site, near Jondorf's Hall, now designated landmark building, vacant of structures. Not too long ago, this immediate area near North and Clybourne was sort of a tenderloin district, which had suffered from disinvestment and heavy-handed land clearance policies, demolishing vast areas and entire blocks of historic buildings. These 4 structures also represent a new vision to the greater Lincoln Park community, where commercial buildings in the community experienced a renaissance beginning in the 1970s and continuing into the 1980s and beyond. When this was occurring, this is one of the few bright spots at the time, encouraging a reuse of historic commercial buildings versus wholesale demolition. And you've heard the story about John Baird, and I think that's very important because this has really become an anchor district with 2 theaters, most notably Steppenwolf and Royal George, and a community of restaurants, and that wasn't always the case. So we very much think this would be a fine addition to our Chicago neighborhood landmarks, and want to include and thank everybody involved, from Deidre Graziano to Diane Levin, Diane Gonzalez, Ellen Mellis, Lincoln Central, and all the community organizations, Alderman Smith and Alderman Brian Hopkins, and of course, Terry Tatum, who helped to prepare this report. We at Preservation Chicago very much support the designation of these buildings located at the corner of Wilsted and Halsted Street as a designated Chicago landmark district. Thank you.
Thank you, Ward. And there are no other people wanting to testify on item number 3. I know that Ward, you signed up to testify on item number 5. However, that item has been deferred at the request of the applicant. So we will defer your testimony as well until we're able to hear the presentation. Thank you. So we don't have anybody else who wishes to testify on any other matters. Let's move to the regular meeting, and let me start with the approval of the minutes for the meeting of November 5th. The minutes were circulated to the commissioners, and if there are no changes, I would like to entertain a motion to approve them. Remember that you need to identify yourself when you move. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Tolliver.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second, Burns.
Second by Commissioner Burns. Let me do a roll call. Commissioner Yakovich,
Yes.
Commissioner Hughes,
Yes.
Commissioner Cox.
Yes.
Is Commissioner Osman present or not? How about Commissioner Aguirre? Okay, so we have all commissioners voting yes, and I as chairman affirm the vote. Thank you. The next item is the preliminary landmark designation for the Miracle House located at 2001 North Nordica Avenue on the 29th Ward, and Matt Crawford will make the presentation. Matt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. This mid-century modern structure was built in 1954 and is known as the Miracle House. The owner of the house, Dr. David Scheiner, MD, is requesting landmark designation. Longtime neighborhood resident and preservationist Dan Lempa has volunteered his time with Lisa Dijana to research and write the designation report, which you got in your packet. Staff recommends that the building strongly meets criteria for landmark designation. The house stands at 2001 North Nordica Avenue in the Galewood neighborhood, which is part of the larger Austin community area in the 29th Ward. As you can see from the building outline map at the left, Galewood has a distinctly suburban feel, with the houses deeply set back on large lots. Many of the homes in the neighborhood are pre-war bungalows, as well as Cape Cod and ranch-style homes from the post-war era. Staff recommends that the Miracle House meets 3 criteria for Chicago landmark designation, including criterion 1 for its heritage values, particularly aspects of economy, society, and culture in post-war America. Aspects of society and culture that the house conveys are the can-do spirit and self-reliance of neighborhood organizations in the post-war era. The genesis of the house is unlike any other in Chicago, for it was built as a grand prize for a raffle sponsored by the St. William Catholic Parish located a mile away. The name Miracle House was first appeared on the raffle tickets, and it is stuck with the property. The architect's design and most of the construction and furnishings were also donated. The raffle resulted in not just the construction of the Miracle House itself, but also the St. William Parish a mile away. Thus it reflects the important contributions of religious communities made to Chicago neighborhoods. The parish urged architect Belli to create a futuristic design for the house. That design conveys another aspect of post-war culture. After 11 years of depression and 4 years of war, there was a new optimism for the future and a popular interest in new design, known as the Populux aesthetic. This image of the Miracle House from 1955 captures the culture perfectly, showing emerging celebrity Hugh Hefner driving by the Miracle House in a Cadillac convertible. Staff also recommends that the house meets criterion 4 as a unique work of residential architecture in Chicago. The structural system of the house relies on 2 massive steel trusses from which the house is suspended like a bridge, reducing the load-bearing function of the exterior walls and allowing for very ample glass curtain walls. The design of the exterior exemplifies the contemporary style of architecture within the larger modern movement. The contemporary style was characterized by a variety of materials, textures and forms, and it was more popular compared to the more austere forms of mid-century modern house design. Here are a few photos of the interior, which is distinguished by an open floor plan, stone, terrazzo, and paneled wood finishes, exposed structure, and large windows that blend indoor and outdoor space. The Miracle House also satisfies Criterion 5 as the work of Belli and Belli architects and engineers who designed the house pro bono. Belli and Belli was a significant Chicago architectural firm during the mid-20th century and a practice that continues to this day. After serving in World War II, brothers Ito and Anthony Belli founded the firm in 1946. Ito Belli was a modernist who led the firm's idiosyncratic and highly expressive aesthetic. Anthony focused on the technical and extensive construction administration of the firm's turnkey products. By the middle of the 1950s, in an age when many Chicago architectural firms pursued a corporate model, Belli and Belli stayed a family-owned practice despite its great growth. In the 1960s, Ito's sons, Alan and James, joined the firm. Belli and Belli's work is distinguished by structural innovation and an expressive modern aesthetic that was arguably more popular than the minimalism of the international style. I just wanted to show some of Belli and Belli's work. They received a great many commissions for Catholic churches in the mid-20th century in Chicago and across the United States. Belli and Belli's cost-saving innovations in structural engineering, seen in the thin shell concrete design of St. Gertrude at the right, and their very expressive modernist aesthetic, shown at St. John Bosco at the left, found favor in the Catholic world at a time when the church was opening up to all forms of modernism, including art, architecture, and philosophy. Belli and Belli also designed a number of schools, including St. Patrick, shown here in Portage Park, an award-winning design that was also exhibited at the Art Institute. Here are a few more examples of the firm's school design, which show the influence of more expressive streams of modern architecture, particularly the influence of Saarinen and Corbusier. Belli and Belli also specialize in hospital design, and here are two lakefront examples in Chicago showing the firm's embrace of material and formal variety and color in architecture. In addition to the landmark criteria just discussed, staff believes that the home also meets the separate integrity criterion. The Miracle House has an excellent integrity, retaining its historic site characteristics on its corner lot, overall form, massing, materials, and detailing. In 1965, an addition was made to the rear of the house, which is compatible with the original design. At some point after 1999, a removable canopy was added to a second floor balcony. These changes do not compromise the building's ability to convey its value. So in conclusion, I want to thank the authors of this report, Dan Lempa and Lisa DiChiara, as well as Jim Belli, son of the architect who provided archival information and support. The house is located in the 29th Ward, and Alderman Taliaferro supports the landmark designation. And again, the owner, Dr. Scheiner, who is just the third owner of this property, is seeking landmark designation to protect it. So staff recommends that the significant historical and architectural features of the building be preliminarily identified as all exterior elevations, including roof lines of the building. You have a preliminary landmark recommendation to that effect before you, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I believe Dr. Scheiner, Dan Lempa, Lisa, and Jim Belli are also here. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Before we call on Dr. David Scheiner, could we hear from Lisa and Dan Lempa and Robert Belli? Would you like to make a statement since you helped prepare this report?
I'll go ahead and start. Thank you, commissioners, for including us here today. We're really excited about this proposed designation because it's a real feel-good one for you for the end of the year. 2020 has been a complicated year, so we love it when we have an owner come forward who wants their property landmarked and pursues it. Dr. Scheiner and Dan Lempa have been at this for several years. Dan first approached me about 2 years ago at the recommendation of Ann Sullivan. Many of you know at the School of the Art Institute's Historic Preservation Program. And Dan was a student there and came to me for advice on how to best protect the home because it was very important to Dr. Scheiner, who will not be shy about telling you his age, that he knows that he wants to get protection for this home at this point in his life and understands its importance, not only architecturally, but culturally. And what is so fascinating about this home, as you heard from Matt's presentation, is not only that it's a very important example of modernism and in a corner of the city that we don't think about very often. I mean, this is really a geography, an area of the city that does not get much attention. It's a wonderful community. And as far as I know, it'll be the first designated Chicago landmark in the Galewood neighborhood specifically, not in the ward, but in Galewood. And it's a fantastic example of mid-century architecture. And I think it'll also be the first Belli and Belli designed building in Chicago to be designated. As many of you know, we lost their important Cuneo Hospital just a couple years ago after a large advocacy campaign. So it's really wonderful to see a Belli and Belli designed building up for consideration now. And then, of course, its connection to the Chicago Catholic Archdiocese is a really interesting story, and again, connects it to the community that wanted to build a new parish campus for their St. William Parish. And to think that a priest of the era with that congregation felt that a fantastic modern house would be a great way through a raffle to raise money to build that campus. Belli and Belli was already a very well recognized firm and favorite firm of the Archdiocese, and I think it was a natural ask for them. And they clearly came through, and I'm sure Jim can speak to that in terms of his memories of the pro bono efforts that they put forward to design the house and get many other pro bono companies to provide materials and services. With that, I'd really like Dan, though, to step up because I really credit Dan to being the one who literally knocked on the door of Dr. Scheiner and said, I want to work on your house for a National Register nomination as part of a class at SAIC. And when they contacted me, then we started the conversations about Chicago local designation as the best means to protect the house. So thank you for your consideration today.
Thank you, Lisa. Could we hear from Dan?
Hi there, do you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Well, my situation is I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. 2 years ago, I signed up for a preservation class with Terry Tatum at the Art Institute, and he gives out a list of all these buildings that, you know, we can write a potential practice nominating, National Register nominating. And on the list was the Miracle House at 2001 North Nordica. And the ironic thing with Terry was he didn't know anything about it. Ann Sullivan, the director of the Art Institute Preservation Program, told him to put it on there. So a real nod to Ann Sullivan, because I think she's one of the big reasons we are here today with coming around with all of this. But anyway, so I raised my hand and of course, here we are. But going back a little further, as a 6-year-old in 1955, my parents were looking to buy a vacant lot in the Galewood area. And they're looking at all these properties, and we passed by the Miracle House and my dad took us in, bought a raffle ticket for all of us, and we toured it. So as a 6-year-old coming from the Wicker Park neighborhood, I was just amazed at this, you know, this building that I've never seen anything like it. It was just a phenomenal piece of property. And anyway, so my parents bought a piece of property on the other end of the block at 2059 North Nordica. Built a house. A year later, we moved in, and I went to St. Williams. So that's my history, and that's kind of, you know, I grew up around this property, the Miracle House. I've always admired it. I just love the openness of it. It was so unusual even in this neighborhood. It's just a marvelous piece of architecture, you know, from Belli and Belli, and the whole story with St. Williams and the raffle, and it's just a fascinating one. It's just an incredible property, and I'm just so proud and happy to be here today that we could be discussing this.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Matt, you mentioned Mr. Belli, the son of the architect. Is he here? James Belli, please.
Command plus A.
Hold on one second.
Mr. Belli? Mr. Belli, we cannot hear you. I believe that you're muted, according to my screen here.
Unmuted.
Now we can hear. Now you're muted again.
Okay.
Now.
All set?
Yes.
Forgive me, I don't do much of these Zoom meetings, but it's really an honor to be part of this. I guess if you live long enough, you can, these things happen. My father would be very pleased to know that this house would be there. I'm really here to answer any questions you may have regarding what I know of the history of that house.
Thank you. Before we ask any questions, let's hear from Dr. David Scheiner.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
This house means a great deal to me. It's very hard to speak about it without getting emotional. I was going to be married in June of 1999, and my fiance lived near here, and you would ride by this house as a child. And when it went on the open house, she said, let's just take a look at it for the heck of it. I walked into the house, my jaw dropped, and the next day I bid on the house. I had never seen anything like it. I was excited when I walked into the house, and now 21 years later, every time I walk into the house, my heart skips a beat. It's an amazing house. I'm one person living in this house with a friend often, and it doesn't overwhelm me. It's just, it envelops me. I have a kitchen that when it's 10 degrees outside, it'll be 80 degrees in the kitchen because the sun pours in. I have the sunrise, the sun during the day, and the sunset. I have 18 orchids in the kitchen that obviously are in heaven. I was married in the backyard under a plum tree. As soon as the vows were over, a rainstorm occurred. We had to move all the tables, everything into the house, but the house is so big that it was very easy to do that. This house is made for parties because it has so much square footage. And the light with all the windows and glass is just unbelievable. Another person who I have to thank, Dan Lempa, of course, has been a major figure, but I have a man who works on the house when things go wrong named Mike Haynes, and he has kept this house alive for all these years because this is a very, very complicated house. It takes a lot of input, but I have never been in any house in my life that I could feel the way I do in this one. This has a very close emotional connection with me. It's almost spiritual. Thank you.
Thank you. We sincerely appreciate that you, as the owner, you're requesting this designation. So we really, really appreciate that. It's not typical for a property owner to seek a landmark designation. So I commend you for doing that.
Thank you.
Before we ask any questions, I understand Alderman Christopher Taliaferro may want to make a statement. Alderman, are you present?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to you and also to the members of the commission. I'd like to thank you for allowing me just to speak very briefly on the Miracle House, and certainly say thank you to Dr. Scheiner. He's very modest, but Dr. Scheiner was also a personal physician to one of our presidents. And so, but I just like to really say that, you know, Mr. Lempa has said it best, you know, and everyone has given a great presentation. So I won't repeat it, but Mr. Lempa has said it best. The house is not only just breathtaking, but it comes with a fascinating story and a fascinating neighborhood and community story that I think it really begs to be told. For that house to be raffled off and not only provide the erection of the church itself, but the refectory, the convent, it just has a story that needs to be told. The architectural is just incredible. It's breathtaking. It's beautiful. But when I was allowed to tour it, that's when things came into perspective for me. And Dr. Scheiner has really taken this time to not only just keep this beautiful dream and this beautiful property to himself, but he shared it with our community. He shared it with the neighborhood. And so I thank him so much for allowing me to tour. And as soon as we are through our pandemic, I look forward to visiting with my wife. We drive by it all the time, except I don't have a 1955 Cadillac, but we do drive by. My wife and I drive by it all the time. And we are going to visit one day together because this is a stunning house. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak with regard to presenting this as a landmark designation. And I do ask for your favorable consideration on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. And it certainly is a magnificent house. I love it. With that in mind, let me ask my fellow commissioners if they have any questions. If you want to ask a question or make a comment, commissioners, if you can raise your hand, I would recognize you. You know, sometimes we don't get anybody who wants to talk, but that means that everybody's in agreement. That this
Commissioner Leon, excuse me.
Commissioner Burns, yes.
I don't have the opportunity to raise my hand. I'm not sure why.
Okay.
But I do have a brief comment. I'm really touched by the passion of the owner and the human connection to this property that each of the speakers today has shared with us. It's an important part of historic preservation, and so it's really lovely to end the year on this. I'm also really excited to see both a neighborhood that is not represented significantly in landmark communities come before us, and also an architect who has, or an architecture firm that has designed some beautiful properties in many other neighborhoods that also are not landmark designations yet. And I hope that this is the beginning of an opportunity to look at other sites by Belli and Belli that we could consider. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Commissioner Burns. Commissioner Yekovich. Yes,
I just wanted to say this house is, I've been curious about this house, especially more in recent years. This house actually is about less than a block away from where my wife grew up, and I had sort of an extended stay at my mother-in-law's recently to finish my own little project, renovation project, and so spent a lot of time seeing this house throughout different times of the day, walking the dog and kind of over walks. It's certainly a landmark for the neighborhood. It definitely is extremely unique for the city, not only just the neighborhood, but so I'm very proud to learn more about it, and I appreciate all the research and all the different stories that were shared today, and I'm proud to support it.
Thank you. Commissioner Hughes.
I didn't get to spend any time in this community yet. And I hope to when the world is a little bit more normal again, because I'm enamored and really want to get out and see this site for myself. But I too want to echo my fellow commissioners' comments and commending the owner for being proactive and coming forth to designate a property. I want this to set a precedent moving forward for other owners to see the value in preserving the historic fabric of their properties. And so thank you, Mr. Scheiner, for coming forth. And I too heard all of your passion pour out of you about this property. So I'm elated to support this designation as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Cox?
Yes, I I love seeing these stories. It just reminds you, you know, behind every one of these properties, there's a narrative, there's a passionate story of how it was conceived, the people who lived in it, and then more importantly, people who stewarded it, like Dr. Scheiner. So it just reminds us once again how important and how personal historic preservation is, and to see, you know, buildings that were being conceived during an era when they were really courageous in the experimentation and innovation, that they are starting to be celebrated is just really very encouraging. I hope we are in our day producing buildings that will be celebrated, you know, 50, 60 years from now. But again, I applaud the applicant and all of those who surrounded him and helped him bring this forward. Our preservation organizations, the work of the master student. It's just, you know, you just have a sense of what it takes, what it takes to put this forward. But first and foremost, you know, Dr. Scheiner being such an amazing steward of this historic building, and I look forward to supporting the recommendation.
Thank you, Commissioner. I don't see anybody else wishing to speak at this moment.
How do I
So,
raise my hand?
who is? Oh, Dan. Okay.
Dan.
Go ahead.
Can we ask Jim Belli, because I think it's real important to know something about the arms, the construction, the steel of the arms. That's such a significant part of this property. And he's got an interesting story about how they came about. So can we get Jim Belli in here?
He testified earlier. He asked for questions. So you're asking a questions, and I will, Mr. Belli, would you like to address this briefly?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'll try to make this as brief as I can. What happened with the design of the house, it actually started with Notre Dame High School that's in Niles. My father designed it. I got to make this short, and I know it. But my father designed that high school. He was asked to design it. And he did not believe that he would get the commission. So when he drew that high school, when it came time to drawing or designing the gymnasium, my father designed a catenary roof over it, having no idea of how to build it. And I remember as a kid, I was always in the office in the afternoons. I went to St. John Bosco, which was only a block away for grammar school. But anyway, invariably, he got the commission and tried numerous times to change that design, knowing he didn't know how to build it. What happened was, and this is very brief, but Chicago Bridge and Iron came in. They were the people that designed the water towers that you see that are like a golf ball. They thought they could do it in steel. At the time Notre Dame was being done, Chicago Bridge and Iron had their engineers in our office trying to design this steel plate roof for that gymnasium. When a young priest came in with this idea of auctioning off a house, this was not a commission my dad wanted. He did not want to become a residential architect, and even the Cardinal Stritch, questioned him on this. But what really promoted it was Chicago Bridge and Iron looked at my dad. Now you got to remember in 1954, this was about the time that the nation was getting back on its feet after the war. Retooling had taken place. You could begin to get structural, especially in architecture, you could get windows, you could get steel again. And anyway, Chicago Bridge and Iron came in and looked at my dad, got wind of this, and said, Ito, if you design it using steel and really promote steel, we'll donate it. Well, that's when my dad heard that, he figured there might be some credibility to this. So he went back to the Cardinal and told him, and the Cardinal said, well, he said, if you want to try it, try it. The thing was really left up to my dad, because my dad said, who am I designing it for? And Father Frank Cecil was a young priest at that time that came up with this idea, said, design it for yourself. Well, I had an older brother, myself, and a younger sister at the time. So it was really designed for a young family with young children. But what ended up happening was my dad, with knowing that he had to promote steel and knowing that it was fully donated, came up with this idea of a suspension system. There was one other thing that happened at that time, and there was a young man that had developed a system called a Schick IPAN. And what it was a steel form that could be used that gave you a finished ceiling. I know this is, without seeing the drawings, it may not make much sense to you, but cantilevering this off, what tied those two bents together is this IPAN system. It never really, I don't think it progressed much farther than this, but that also was donated. And then it just blossomed. I mean, the terrazzo unions came in and said they'd give all the terrazzo. I think it was Coretti that did the terrazzo at that time. General Electric came in because if it isn't the first house, it's one of the first houses that had an all-electric kitchen and heating system. And then the big one that came for promoting it was Saul Polk of Polk Brothers. They were a good family friends, and Saul got wind of this thing and he told my dad, he said, let us furnish it. I don't know how much you know about the Polk Brothers.
Mr. Belli, your father built a house for free then, huh?
Yes, I mean, it was, everybody just came
Great
along.
story. Great story.
And just, you know.
Thank you for sharing the story. It's great. And it's great, the sense of cooperation from so many businesses to build the house and being so creative. Thank you so much for sharing that story.
Thank you.
There being no other comments, I would like to request a motion to adopt the preliminary landmark recommendation for the Miracle House. Do I have a motion?
I'm busy.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Hughes. Do I have a second?
Seconded by Commissioner Cox.
All right, Commissioner Cox. Commissioner Yakovich?
Yes.
Commissioner Burns?
Yes.
Commissioner Tolliver?
Yes.
And I, as chairman, affirm the vote. Thank you. Great building. Nice transaction. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee.
You're most welcome. Thank you. The next item is number 3, the preliminary landmark recommendation for the Hosted Willow Group, which are series of 4 properties located at 1730-32 North Hosted Street. The even numbers, 1727-733 North Hosted Street. Those are the odd numbers. 800-812 West Willow Street and 745-813 West Willow. This is on the 2nd and 43rd Ward. So could we hear from Dan Kleiber?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here today with a preliminary recommendation for the landmark designation of the Halsted Willow Group of 4 buildings located at approximately 1800 North Halsted Street. At the onset, I would like to say that we are indeed referring to this proposed collection of buildings as a group versus a district, but the time that the commission has used this nomenclature. In fact, we have several such groups already designated, including the Lake Franklin Group, as well as a Gage group of buildings on Michigan Avenue, both in the loop. In addition, I must add that this proposed landmark designation was, and very much still is, a community-driven effort that has been in the works for years and has involved the Lincoln Central Association, Ranch Triangle Association, Landmarks Illinois, and countless other individual residents and stakeholders. And I must just especially call out Deidre Graziano. If you heard during the testimony, she gave up her own time slot in order so someone else could speak. And she has been instrumental in this directly, clearly to me. Finally, I know that Alderman Smith and Alderman Hopkins are here today as well, and they definitely will both want to speak. To help orient you overall, the subject buildings are located in the Lincoln Park community area, approximately 3 miles northwest of the Central Business District. To give you a little context within Lincoln Park itself, you can see that the proposed designation is located within the southwesternmost portion of Lincoln Park, as represented by the red star at the intersection of North Halsted Street and West Willow Street. Nearby designated Chicago landmarks include the Halsted Armitage District 2 blocks to the north, as well as the Yondorf Building on North Avenue to the south and Mulligan School a few blocks west. Now I'd like to provide a detailed look at the context surrounding this group of buildings at this intersection. Again, there are 4 buildings in the proposed group. In no particular order, the first is 1800 North Halsted, which is located in the upper photo, the far left of the screen, which is the northwest corner of the intersection. This building is actually part of a large planned development, which includes a 1970s era redevelopment project on Halsted, as well as the block to the west, Dayton. This planned development, PD 149, requires that the owners of the property consent to landmark designation. As you can see, the buildings to the north of it include a wide variety of generally newer infill development from the last few decades. Lastly, for your information, this building is located in the 43rd Ward, Alderman Smith's ward. The second building is 1732 North Halsted, which is located in the photo at the top of your screen on the far right, which is the southwest corner of the intersection. This building is also part of Plan Development 149, which requires that the owners of the property consent to landmark designation. As you can see, the buildings to the south of it are also generally much newer construction infill development from the last few decades. This building is also located in the 43rd Ward. Now, this next slide contains both buildings 3 and 4, which are 1733 North Halsted, the southeast corner of the intersection, and 1727 through 29, immediately adjacent to it to the south. In this view, which is looking north on Halsted, the 2 subject buildings are located at the far left of the photo on the top of the screen. To the south of these buildings, to the right in the image, is a vintage residential building set back from the street, and much more modern development to the right of that. This side of the street is located within the 2nd Ward, Alderman Hopkins's ward. Putting it all together then, the group of 4 buildings are outlined in red on the map before you. In a nutshell, each of the 4 mixed-use buildings, all originally with ground floor commercial uses and upper floor residential uses, date from the 1880s and form a rare grouping of such buildings that have served as a highly localized node of activity for nearly 140 years. To that end, Commission staff recommends that the Halsted Willow group of buildings meet 3 criteria for Chicago landmark designation, including criterion 1 for heritage. The Halsted Willow group is a significant group of 19th century mixed-use buildings, exemplifying the historic and architectural importance of such buildings to the economic and social history of Chicago. The buildings in the group were built in the 1880s, a period of great growth for Chicago in general and the Lincoln Park community area in particular. They remain an important link to Chicago's economic and social history for both Chicago residents and visitors. The buildings in the Halsted Willow Group were built and used by ethnic German immigrants and descendants through the late 19th and early 20th centuries, exemplifying the historic importance of Germans to Chicago and its neighborhoods. In addition, it should be noted that over the decades, collectively, the buildings housed several commercial enterprises that served the area, including a butcher, various saloons, a grocer, drugstore, and a public hall. Most notably, the 1800 North Halsted building was the home of Schulien's, a German tavern restaurant that was a beehive of activity and became even more famous for Matt Schulien's magic shows. Mr. Schulien, depicted above, was described in the day by the Chicago Tribune as a brilliant manipulator of cards. He is seen in the photo on the right performing his card on the wall trick, where he would throw a deck of cards onto a wall, and the only one left on the wall at the end would be the one that the customer had picked. Commission staff also recommends that the grouping meets criterion 4 for exemplary architecture. The Halsted Willow Group is a significant group of Victorian-era store and flats buildings, exemplifying the importance of this commercial building type. One building also historically housed a third-floor public hall, a type of meeting hall of significance to Chicago's working and middle-class neighborhoods. The buildings in the Halsted Willow Group are fine and significant examples of neighborhood mixed-use buildings in the Italianate and Queen Anne architectural styles, both significant styles to the history of Chicago architecture and characteristic of the city's 19th century architecture. Moreover, the buildings in the group are finely constructed and ornamented with brick, stone, terracotta, and pressed metal, exemplifying the best of late 19th century craftsmanship and use of building materials. Commission staff also recommends that the grouping meets criterion 6 for its association with a theme. The Halsted Willow Group's buildings display a distinct visual unity based on a consistent scale and size, building setbacks, overall design, use of building materials, and detailing. The buildings of the group form an informal gateway to the residential neighborhoods east and west of Halsted due to their location, distinctive appearance, and handsome design. In addition to the landmark criteria just discussed, the group also meets the separate integrity criterion. Overall, the Halsted Willow Group has excellent historic integrity, as is represented by this vintage and current photo of 1800 North Halsted. The group's buildings retain their original sites, overall building forms, and character-defining exterior details. They retain historic window patterns and openings, as well as ornamental brickwork, terracotta, and pressed metal. Change is an inevitable condition of commercial buildings that thrive over many decades, and the buildings in the Halsted Willow Group have had architectural changes made over time. Common changes include storefront alterations, especially store window sash and changes in store and upper floor entrances. However, most of the buildings in the group appear to have retained historic storefront framing elements, including columns, piers, and lintels. Another common change is window sash replacement. Windows in all 4 buildings appear to have been replaced over time. However, the most common current sash configuration, 1/1 double hung, is most likely identical to the historic sash configuration in all 4 buildings. Despite changes, the Halsted Willow Group retains more than sufficient historic integrity for Chicago landmark designation. Therefore, in conclusion, based on its preliminary evaluation of the Halsted Willow Group, the Commission staff recommends that the significant historical and architectural features be identified as all exterior elevations, including roof lines, of buildings in the group as seen from public rights of way. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I know that the property owners and the older woman and older men are here, but before we proceed with their testimony, let me ask you a very quick question. This is the designation of the buildings. No, we're not creating a district, a landmark district. Is that correct?
Correct. We're calling this a group of buildings, but I have to say that that's more of nomenclature. I mean, for ordinance purposes, for timelines, This will be considered a district, but we're calling it a group.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that clarification. Let's see, before we ask any questions, I believe there are 3 owners for the 4 properties. Speaking on behalf of the owner of 1727 North Hosty Street is their attorney Bernard Citron.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission.
Hello.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. We did submit a formal objection to the inclusion of the 1727 building into this district, and I am going back to that because, as noted by Mr. Kleber, this is a district, and that carries some concerns into how this will ultimately affect the future of our building. While we respect the historical preservation process in the city of Chicago, and I have worked over the years many times with your commission and with staff of the Department of Planning and Development on historical properties, and in fact have submitted buildings on behalf of owners asking for landmark designation. So it's not as uncommon as maybe seem. We have concerns over this property. One thing that I don't believe was pointed out and I find this to be interesting, but it was not pointed out in the report, was the fact that the 2 buildings on the west side of the street, on the even side of the street, are considered orange buildings under the original reports that were done many, many years ago. Neither of the 2 buildings on the east side of the street were ever considered orange buildings. And if you look at the maps today, they're not considered orange buildings. It was not considered that way when our client bought the property. An important thing to point out is my client, GRL, has no intention of tearing down his building, has no intention of selling the building at this point in time. So we don't really see why this is needed. But conversely, our building at 1727 has undergone a number of changes, as pointed out by Mr. Kleber, through the years, and therein lies one of the major concerns that we have, specifically the storefront on the lower level, on the ground floor. There was major changes, even more than any of the other buildings that are part of this group or district that were made. And it was clear in discussing this issue with Department of Planning staff that if we ever went to redo that or rehab that storefront, we would in fact be asked or required to bring it back to a more original condition. And someone used the word priceless before, one of the community members, in terms of these buildings and their heritage as being priceless. And I need to point out to the commission, and you've heard this before, it is not without a price. So inclusion of the 1727 building within this district will carry a price in the future. If we ever find the need, or if the tenant finds the need to make changes to that ground level, they will have to go through a more formal process, including bringing this before, at minimum, the permit review committee of your district, of your commission. And while we respect the work that staff does, and while we respect the work that the commission does on these things, and always in light of the surrounding circumstances, that change will in effect add cost to this. The other concern, and that's why the issue of whether this is a group or a district or an individual designation, the south elevation of our property was extensively changed at the time this building was rehabbed. You can, though those pictures were not really shared in the report. If there is any proposal ever made to add to that south elevation, again, we will be going through a much more formal process, which in all likely will include the community. So even though that side of the building has had significant changes, and even though, as pointed out by staff, that's a secondary elevation, it is seen from the street because it's open right now. So that will be part of that process, and that could have an economic effect on the building. Now, we firmly believe that these buildings in their current configuration are an important element of this community. The fact that they are mixed use buildings, that there is commercial uses on the ground floor and residential above. And we fully expect that to remain that way for time to come. But the way to preserve those types of buildings is not necessarily to add further restrictions. We have a commercial tenant on the ground floor of this building now. It happens to be a pretty noted Chicago restaurant. And we expect and hope that they will stay there for the time to come in the future. They may find, though, the need to make changes to accommodate changes in business. At best, this inclusion within a designated district will add a level of complexity that they may well not want to deal with. Or worse, they may not be there in times to come, and we will be looking for another commercial tenant. And it's that commercial tenant that makes this building viable. We have the residential above, which will remain, but we want to keep the commercial on the ground floor. That's what we want to be there. But inclusion within this district, if this district is so created, will, if nothing else, add a complexity to future uses on that ground floor. And that hurts the survivability of this building in its current condition. It would actually potentially lead to something other than what's there today. Now, our building, in effect, is protected by the low density zoning designation on this building. It can't be torn down and a large scale development put in its place. There's underlying zoning that protect that, which leads to another question I have is and again, I don't represent the property owners on the west side of the street, the 1800 building, the other building on the southwest corner, but those buildings are in fact protected because they are in the planned development. They are in sub-area A of planned development 149, and they can't just be torn down and replaced with something else. There would be an entire community process and legislative process that would be required for those buildings to ever be changed and substituted for something else. So we're sort of at a loss as to why this is going forward at this period of time. There's been no plans, but anyway, that's not, I don't represent that side of it.
Let me say that I hear an echo, so let me see if I could accommodate my microphone. You made very good points, and let me remind everybody, not just you, that this is a preliminary designation, and this is the opportunity to present your concerns, whether you support or no. We hear you. Eventually, we'll have to go through the process. This is not we're not considering here the final recommendation. So I sincerely appreciate your comments. I'm
Thank you.
Sure that the committee don't go away because the other commissioners may have questions. But
I'm not going anywhere. Thank you.
Everybody else an opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's move to the representative for the owners of 1732 and 1800 North Hosted, Rolando Acosta.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission.
Good
I
afternoon,
hope everybody
Rolando.
is well. I am here on behalf of the owners of 1800 North Halsted, specifically 1800 North Halsted Owner LLC, and the owner of 1732 North Halsted, specifically 1732 North Halsted Owner LLC. Very creative names we come up with. But we are here to support the inclusion of these two buildings either in the district or their designation as landmark, as the commission may wish to pursue. We had long discussions with the community group, Ranch Triangle, as well as the alderman, when we first approached them as Larimar, which is the ultimate owner behind the two LLCs, purchase these properties. And from the beginning, they wished to have these things preserved. We have no intention of modifying them. We were happy to have them included or designated and have consented to that and continue to consent to that. We intend for them to remain, and we intend to be good stewards of these buildings. So with that, you have, the ownership's consent and support for the proposed designation.
Thank you, Rolando. Can we hear from Alderwoman Smith?
Sure, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank the commission for hearing this matter today and thank Commissioner Cox and the Landmark staff for their support in getting us to this day. As you heard from the comments before the testimony today, the landmarking of this corner, this very important corner of Lincoln Park, really the entrance, one of the entrances to our community, the formal entrances almost to our community, has been really a long time coming. I think we first talked about it probably in 2011, right after I came into office. And as you heard, we had a development proposal that involved tearing down one of the buildings. And it was a very emotional and very well-informed community meeting that we then turned the proposal down. Sometimes when you're alderman, you have to wait for the right development proposal for the community. And this was a case in which we were richly rewarded by doing that. Because by turning down one development proposal, it opened up the possibilities of another. And the Larimar Group, which came to our office and then to our community to present an in-scale development proposal that would preserve both these buildings. This is very important to Lincoln Park, as you heard. In fact, these buildings are so important to Lincoln Park that when they were owned by Baird and Warner, John Baird himself decided to save these buildings to show off the things that were delightful and different about Lincoln Park and its vintage history, even when he was building some of the buildings that are now adjacent to it. So we think that that is very important. We also, one other planning reason why we sought to preserve this entire corner is because there is a lot of development pressure from the south of us at the famed Northern Clymer Shopping District. And this is a residential area with walkable stores and restaurants. It also is a bit of a theater district because of Steppenwolf Theater right down the street, where on one of those vacant lots, they are building their magnificent facility, and the Royal George Theater right across the way. And that really is the character of the community. That is really what the community is about. It's about, today, it's about the performing arts and fine dining, as witnessed by the fact that Boca Restaurant is in one of the buildings here and Alinea is 2 doors down. So this is a very important cultural corner that we would not want transformed, because part of this whole, part of the entire cultural setting for Lincoln Park is present in these buildings. You've also heard that these are also buildings of great cultural value. And I think one thing that wasn't mentioned is that 1800, in addition to having been the home of so many things, may have been the location of the city's first mosque. The first collection of worshipers of Islam actually had their services in that 3rd floor space in the mid 50s, as I recall. So this whole area is just dripping in significance. And all the buildings are important because they do frame our community. If you were to put one of those sort of hokey arches over them and say, "Welcome to Lincoln Park" in it, which we certainly do not intend to do, but if one were to do it, it would be represented by buildings like this. So we're very, very grateful and hopeful that you will issue this landmark designation. I also want you to know that we did reach out to the owners of these buildings. And when we had redistricting a few years ago, and these came into the 2nd ward, Alderman Hopkins will say that he picked up that job, and have reached out and had conversations with, we certainly had conversations with Mr. Citron about this a number of years ago, because as we've said, this project has been in the work for at least 6 years. And thanks to Landmarks Illinois for their grant and our very committed community organizations, we actually paid for the historic study that was requested by the Landmarks staff, because the Landmarks staff is so busy and so wonderful that sometimes they can't get to every single report when we'd like it. So I would just like to thank the commissioner, the commission, the staff, and most importantly, Larimar, the neighbors, our community organizations, for really gathering together to preserve this very important gateway to Lincoln Park. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderwoman. I neglected to call on the property owner of 1733 North Hosted, Jim Masterson. Is he here? Thank you, Alderwoman, for your statement. Is Mr. Masterson here? If not, then let me call on Alderman Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You do have a letter of support on file from my office for this preliminary designation. But I want to begin by acknowledging what Alderman Smith just said with regard to the history behind this effort and the fact that it began so much longer than the second ward as we know it even exists. So I did inherit this, and I became aware of the development pressure on this area while I was still a candidate for this office. One of the witnesses who testified earlier, Diane Levin, briefed me adequately on this years ago. And I pledged at that time that if I were elected alderman, I would do everything I could to continue moving this ball down the field in what has been a very lengthy community-led process. So I acknowledge the community's leadership on this. When the community leads, the elected officials follow. And that's exactly what's happening here. If you read the preliminary report, the case makes itself, in my opinion, for designation. Really, the only weakness in the case is the fact that we don't know who the architect is. And that's unfortunate. That's been lost to history, but that's not uncommon for buildings like this. And perhaps someday, some enterprising researcher working on their graduate degree might find the architect. But other than that, it is a absolutely unimpeachable case for historic preservation and landmark designation, and all the protections that would accompany that should be designated on these structures. The point was raised about perhaps the duplicative nature of it for the buildings on the west side of Halsted. I would only say to that, if you really, really don't want your pants to fall down, you put on a belt and suspenders, right? Without regard to whatever fashion faux pas that might look like. And in Chicago, when it comes to losing historic buildings to the wrecking ball, we have a long history of allowing our pants to fall down. So I certainly do not think it's a mistake to do something that might seem unnecessary in terms of preservation of these buildings, because you never know what the future might bring. It makes perfect sense to me to draw the strongest line that you can when a case for historic preservation is as compelling as the one here for this group. And I say group, and if we're not going to call it a district anymore, fine, it's a group. It is smaller than the other districts that I have in my ward in terms of its geography. But that does allow one to point out that obviously it would be a district if it wasn't for the fact that so many historic structures around there have been lost to the wrecking ball over the decades, including the ones just to the north. It's unfortunate. We can't go back in time, but so many of these buildings would have justified the creation of a larger district, and they're gone. That is not an argument to not move forward. In fact, it adds great weight to the argument to preserve what is left. And in conclusion, I just want to point out that the discussion of how this is a gateway and a visible symbol in many ways, as Alderman Smith said, if we wanted an arch, which we don't, I agree, something like this could be a logo on it. There's practical applications to that. I just recently concluded a community review process for a new residential building that will be constructed just to the south of here, across from Steppenwolf Theater at 1623. It's a residential building. And at one point, community suggestions and staff from the Department of Planning encouraged the architect to go back to the drawing board, redesign the building, and look at the intersection of Halsted and Willow for inspiration. That was done. And the building that was just approved and will begin construction early next year was redesigned, in my opinion, vastly improved, and in the opinion of many of the witnesses who testified in support of it, because it speaks to the theme that is so obviously present at this particular corner. So history is not dead, it is living, it is breathing, it is with us today, and it continues to inspire the architecture in this area of Lincoln Park. So with that said, I'm in strong support of this proposal, and to counsel for the owner of the building in my ward, I can only say to you, sir, I will pledge the full cooperation of my office with any effort to attain tax credits or any other thing that could mitigate your opposition of your client for this. And talking about modifications for tenants and other very practical matters like that, we would certainly work with you in good faith, on any minor changes or anything that the building needs to preserve your viable commercial use. It's not our intention to undermine the viability of your client's property at all. And if there's anything my office can do to help with that, assuming this designation does pass, we would pledge to work with you on that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we urge a favorable vote on this matter.
Thank you, Alderman. Let me call Mr. Masterson again, give him an opportunity if he's here. If no, I'm going to open this up for questions by the commissioners, but let me ask a quick question to Dan. Could you, Dan, please explain where we are right now and what the next step will be? This is a preliminary designation, and if you can clarify for the benefit of everybody what the process is before this becomes a formal designation.
Sure thing. Can you hear me okay again?
Yes.
Great. As I said too, for ordinance purposes, we are treating this, as a district, and that affects the ultimate timeline of the designation. But regardless of that, I mean, our next step, if the commission votes today to approve, would be to send a certified letter to the owners of the property, and then we would be following up back with the commission, most likely at the January meeting, with our DPD report. That would be January, I believe, 7th. And then after that, then we would begin formally requesting the consent of the owners. The owners would have 45 days to respond. And in this case, the ordinance is really specific. It actually then, because like I said, we're treating this as a district, the aldermen of the wards can request an extension within that time of 120 more days. And if we do not get the consent, then we would go to a public hearing and cross that bridge when we come to it. So
thank you, Dan. And I just wanted you to say that on the record, to provide Mr. Citron with some assurances of what the process is, that there is still recourse, and that there is a process that will be followed. We heard his objection, and then, but I wanted him to understand also what the process is. Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is really tough because, I'm in 100% support of this, but I do want us to address some of Mr. Citron's concerns for him to hopefully take back to his owner and his client. Dan, my question for you, one of the concerns that he mentioned was, if there's ever any proposal for work in the future, that they would have to revert it back to its original form, not even what's there today. Is that true? And if so, is there something that we can write in, to the process to maybe have it reviewed at each of the instance, rather than requiring it to be reverted back to its original form?
For that question, if you don't mind, I would like to give that one to Dijana Cuvalo.
Okay, thanks.
Hello, commissioners. This is Dijana. So
hello.
There's different levels of changes that can occur, and the conditions that are currently existing can be grandfathered. If they're maintained and minor changes are made to them, they can remain. It's really when you want to completely remove something and reconstruct a portion of that, that's when you start looking at what is the most appropriate way to do that and what is the kind of historic evidence that's there on the building. So it is not a clean cut, like black and white decision that we can make. I think that we would be happy to review proposals. We can certainly discuss any issues with that. We can bring them to permit review committee, even pre-permit during this process if the applicant wishes to do that.
Thank you. That's what I thought. I just wanted to, again, put that on the record and clarify that I think that it is more fluid than Mr. Cintron's concerns were earlier. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Dijana. Mr. Cintron, I just wanted to assure you that, and you probably have been doing this, but in any case, make sure that you continue talking to the Department of Planning and Development to address the concerns that you have raised, which are very valid concerns about the property and the property owner that you represent. Are there any other questions from the commissioners? I don't see anybody raising their hands. Therefore, I would like to request a motion to adopt the preliminary landmark recommendation to City Council for the hosted Willow Group. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Commissioner Giacchetti.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Tolliver. Let me do a roll call. Commissioner Burns.
Yes.
Commissioner Hughes.
Yes.
Commissioner Cox.
Yes.
And I affirm the vote as chairman. Thank you. And we look forward to seeing progress in this designation. It'll come back to us for a final. And if there has to be a public hearing, there will be a public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alderman, and thank you, Alderwoman. Very much
you.
appreciated your comments.
Thank you very much.
The next item, the Class L property tax incentive. This is the final certification for Wrigley Field, 1060 West Addison Street. And Dijana will make the presentation on behalf of the department.
Thank you, commissioners. Good afternoon. Wrigley Field Holdings LLC is requesting certification of the Class L property tax incentive for Wrigley Field. Wrigley Field was designated a Chicago landmark in February 2004, and on November 13, 2013, the City Council approved a Class L ordinance for the property. Certification of the scope of work and budget for a Class L project is the final step by the Commission on Chicago Landmarks to administer this incentive. This certification would then be used by the building owner to complete their application for the Class L assessment with the Cook County Assessor. The owner is also pursuing federal rehabilitation tax credits, and this project has been reviewed and approved by the National Park Service. The owner has completed the 5-phase rehabilitation and modernization of the ballpark. The scope of work included restoration of the significant exterior features of the park, extensive rehabilitation of interior spaces and the structure of the park, upgrades of the back-of house facilities, and new signs. The exterior work included removal of non-historic facade cladding, such as the 1970s concrete panels and chain link fencing. Existing historic elements were repaired and painted. Missing elements, such as ironwork fencing and stucco walls and Spanish-style roofing, were recreated based on historic documentation. The remaining exterior facade was repaired as needed. The exterior work also included the construction of new west gate for fan exiting, construction of rooftop verandas around the park overlooking Addison and Clark Streets, with associated new concessions and additional food and beverage work and merchandise storage area. As part of this work, the existing dormers were rebuilt and the existing roof was removed and replaced as necessary at all levels of the ballpark. Also included in the Class L scope of work was the dismantlement and relocation of Sheffield and Waveland brick walls and the expansion of the bleacher deck areas. The interior scope of work included the rehabilitation of center field bleachers to meet code and an extension of the top platform deck. The historic center field scoreboard was repaired and the non-historic LED sign under the scoreboard was removed. The existing Chicago Cubs and visitor dugouts were expanded to allow for a better facility for the players, and the ivy-covered brick outfield wall was carefully repaired. Substantial work to the grandstands was part of the Class L work, including installation of new foundations at various locations, including micropiling is needed, structural steel reinforcement of numerous columns, lead paint abatement, removal and replacement of a substantial section of lower concrete seating bowl, removal and replacement of deteriorated concrete sections, repair of existing historic railing, and installation of new period handrail and safety railing were required. As part of the Class L project, extensive interior work was completed, including rebuilding and renovation of the Cubs clubhouse and associated offices and manager spaces, including new training spaces and hydrotherapy areas, construction of new batting tunnels, including connection to the renovated dugout, rebuilding of the visitor clubhouse and training rooms, interior expansion and renovation of suites, construction of new elevators and associated lobbies, replacement of main concourse flooring, installation of additional and new lighting, and rebuilding of concession areas, life safety, plumbing, electrical, and HVAC improvements. The initial budget for the Class L eligible expenses was just over $222 million. The owner has spent over $585 million for Class L eligible scope of work, which is about $363 million more than initially estimated. In total, the owner invested $677 million in the project. In addition to reviewing and approving the building permits for this work, historic preservation staff conducted site visits to monitor the progress and approve samples as required. Staff therefore recommends that the commission certify the completion of this Class L project. I believe representatives of the owner are here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we ask any questions, let's hear from, I believe, Elizabeth Butler, who is the attorney on behalf of the applicant, and Mike Lofrano, who represent the Cubs. I don't know whether Mike wants to talk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. My name is Liz Butler from the law firm of DLA Piper. We're located at 444 West Lake Street in Chicago. I, along with my colleague Paul Shadle, represent the applicant in this matter, Wrigley Field Holdings, LLC. I'm joined today by Mike Lofrano, the Executive Vice President and Chief Legal Officer for the applicant. We're before the commission today seeking final certification of the Class L approval for Wrigley Field. Wrigley was designated as a landmark, a Chicago landmark in 2004, and then it received its National Historic Landmark designation just in 2020, a few weeks ago. Wrigley Field is the oldest National League ballpark and the second oldest ballpark in Major League Baseball. Wrigley Field Holdings undertook the largest rehabilitation in the history of the ballpark to retain the historic tradition and adapt the facility for Major League Baseball in the modern era. The work started in late 2014, and the final phase of the Class L scope of work was completed late last year. As you heard Ms. Cuvalo's presentation, the applicant has worked very closely with Landmark staff throughout the course of the project. Landmark staff has inspected the building and found that the work has been completed in accordance with the approved Class L plans, budget, and scope of work. We greatly appreciate all of the work by Landmark staff. We continue to be grateful for their assistance and expertise during the design, construction, and review of this complex project. and we respectfully request issuance by this commission of the final certification of the Class L project. We're available to answer any questions that the commission might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Butler. Mike, would you like to make a statement?
Oh, I think Ms. Butler said it very well, Mr. Chairman, but I will extend our thank you to the commission and to you in particular. You know, that we have been at this a long time, and there was times when I didn't know if we would make it this far. But with the help of the commission and the staff and everybody who's worked on this project, we have made it here. I will add that today is a significant date in the history of Wrigley Field. If you've been around long enough, you have many significant dates, but it was 94 years ago today, on December 3rd, 1926, that the name of the ballpark was officially changed to Wrigley Field. When it was built, it was originally called Weigman Park after the name of the then current owner, and then it became Cubs Park before it was purchased by Mr. Wrigley. And it was an official action of the board on December 3rd of 1926, so 94 years ago to the date, that we changed the name to Wrigley Field. And it has been Wrigley Field ever since. But thank you for having us today, and we obviously hope that you will look favorably on the Class L certification.
Thank you, Mike. And yes, indeed, it has been a long time. I think that of all the commissioners, only Reverend Tolliver and I heard the initial presentation a few years back, and we went through the public hearings. So thank you. We really appreciate you coming and investing over $500 million into the renovation of the building. Is very much appreciated, and we love it. Now we need to win another World Series, right? Commissioners, do you have any questions for either Ms. Butler or Mike Lofrano? Oh, nobody wants to speak. Okay. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, Commissioner Hughes.
This is really quick. As a Cardinal fan, no, I'm just kidding.
That's why your background is red?
I am originally from St. Louis, but I can say since I've moved here, I have jumped onto kind of the Cub fan wagon and have supported this team, but the work has been incredible. I used to live up past Wrigley Field in Ravenswood and just walk by it all the time during the construction. And it looks amazing now. The transformation is great. So kudos to you guys, but I had to throw in my Cardinal history in there too. So thank you so much though for your work on this.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other commissioners who would like to make a statement? Okay, if no, I would like to request a motion that the commission certifies that the project has been substantially completed in accordance with the approved ordinance and meets the eligibility requirements for the Class L incentive for Wrigley Field. Actually, let me make this differently. I move to approve this. As chairman, I move to approve, and I will seek for ask for a second.
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Hughes. Let me do a roll call. Commissioner Burns.
Yes.
Commissioner Yekovich.
Yes.
Commissioner Cox.
Yes.
And Commissioner Tolliver.
Yes.
So the resolution passed and the certification is approved. Thank you for all
Thank
your
you.
work. And we look
Thank you,
forward to many
commissioners.
years, upcoming years of winning games. Thank you.
Let's keep it going. Thank you, commissioners.
Thanks. Let's move to the next item. The next item, which is Class L property tax incentive for the Continental and Commercial National Bank building. That item has been deferred at the request of the applicant, so we will not hear that. So let's move to the preliminary decision on permit application for demolition pursuant to section 2-120-740 through 2-120-825 of the municipal code in the Fulton Randall Market District for the property located at 1020 West Randall Street, and Joyce Ramos will make the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In August 2020, the Permit Review Committee reviewed the proposed demolition of a one-story bank building and drive-through as part of the pre-permit review of a new construction project for the site. The PRC's recommendations regarding the demolition are included in the approval letter included in the packet. namely the demolition of the non-contributing building located at 1020 West Randolph, will not be an adverse effect on the character of the district. The PRC therefore recommended that the commission recommend to the City Council approval of the proposed demolition. The building is located at the northeast corner of Randolph and Carpenter Streets. It is a one-story masonry bank building constructed sometime after the year 2000, well after the district's period of significance, which is between 1850 to 1964. The owners proposed to demolish the building, highlighted in the plat survey in yellow, and the canopy consisting of 5 drive-through lanes, highlighted in blue, is shown in the photos on the right. The following slides show examples of the buildings found within the district. The landmark designation ordinance for the Fulton Randolph Market District states the following. The district is the oldest food marketing district in Chicago, though the majority of the historic buildings in the district were built between 1880 and 1929. The district began to function as a food market in 1850 when a municipal market hall was built in the middle of Randolph Street. The district conveys Chicago's importance as a wholesale market into which poured agricultural bounty of the Midwest and West. The district includes a significant number of manufacturing and warehouse buildings, which housed related industrial businesses that helped generate Chicago's economic development as an industrial city. The district functioned historically and continuously as a meatpacking district, one of the city's most historically significant industries. And finally, many of the buildings in the district exhibit excellent design and craftsmanship in brick masonry. Section G4 of the rules and regulations lists 6 criteria that shall be considered in determining whether a property contributes to the character of a landmark district. And these are addressed individually on the staff report. The property owner has reviewed the proposed demolition with the alderman and the community groups. Alderman Burnett has submitted a letter of support, which was included in your packet. Therefore, staff recommends that the commission finds that the building is non-contributing to the character of the landmark district, finds the demolition of the building will not adversely affect any significant historical or architectural features of the landmark district, approves the permit application for the demolition of the building, and recommends that the City Council of the City of Chicago accept the commission's approval of the permit application for the demolition of the building. This concludes my presentation. The applicants are also here to answer any questions the commission may have. Thank you.
Since this is a demolition, so this is not a contributing building, right?
This is not a contributing building.
Let me ask the commissioners whether they have any questions regarding this. So this is a non-contributing building, so I don't, if the applicants want to speak, that'll be fine, but I don't think that it will be necessary for them to speak. So I'd like to request a motion to accept the staff recommendation on the permit application for demolition of 1020 West Randolph Street. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Burns.
Do I have a second?
A second by Commissioner Cox.
Perfect. Commissioner Yakovich?
Yes.
Commissioner Hughes? Commissioner Hughes? Let me move to Commissioner Tolliver.
Yes.
And let me call Commissioner Hughes again.
Yes.
All right. And I affirm the vote as chairman. So the demolition is approved. Thank you. The next item is also a demolition preliminary decision on permit application for demolition pursuant to sections 2-120-740 through sections 2-120-825 of the municipal code, also in the Fulton Randolph Market District for the property located at 906 West Fulton Market. And and the property located at 910 West Fulton Market as well. So these are 2 demolitions. And Larry Shore will make the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The PRC reviewed these proposed demolition and partial demolition as a part of a pre-permit review of a larger project at its May 2020 meeting. The PRC's recommendations to allow the demolition and partial demolition of 906 and 910 West Fulton Market are included in your packet. The PRC recommends that the commission approve the proposed demolitions of 906 West Fulton Market and the partial demolition of 910 West Fulton Market with the rehabilitation of the front facade to be retained in place according to section 2-120-825 of the Municipal Code of Chicago. Let's go to the next slide. These properties are located near the north edge of the district and consist of 3 buildings which were connected and used in tandem for many years. Section G4 of the rules and regulations lists the criteria considered in determining whether a property contributes to the character of a landmark district, and these are addressed in the PRC staff report included in your packet. In May 2020, the PRC preliminarily found that these demolitions and partial demolition is not an adverse impact. The PRC confirmed that 906 West Fulton Market is non-contributing to the district due to substantial alterations over time. Therefore, it may be demolished subject to the proper procedures. The building at 910 West Fulton Market was found to be contributing, but due to structural conditions, the majority of the building must be demolished and replaced with new structure. The applicant estimates that this results in 55% demolition, requiring council approval. The applicant proposes to retain the front facade and 7 feet of the east facade, which will be braced in place and retained. So the Permit Review Committee does recommend to the Commission, number 1, to find that the demolition of the non-contributing building at 906 West Fulton Market and the partial demolition of the contributing building at 910 West Fulton Market with the rehabilitation of the front facade to be retained in place will not be an adverse effect on the character of the district. 2, find that the proposed demolition and partial demolition of the buildings will not be an adverse effect on the significant historical and architectural features of the district. And 3, recommend to City Council approval of the proposed demolition and partial demolition of the buildings in accordance with the relevant sections of the municipal code. That's all I've got. Obviously, there's 2 separate resolutions because we have 2 different addresses, but we just put these together to kind of simplify the presentation. So if you have any questions for me, I'd be glad to take those, and I believe the applicants are on the call as well.
Thank you, Larry. Yeah, we will have to take 2 different votes, but I also have a note here that the owner's representative, Michael Hines, would like to make a statement. So, Mr. Hines.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for your consideration here. We're excited to be in front of the commission again. We, again, presented this, as Larry mentioned, back in May and have stayed consistent with the documents that were presented at that time. So we hope that you hope to vote for approval here for the demo and partial demolition of 906 and 910 Fulton. Thank you for your consideration and let us know if any questions.
Thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions for either Mr. Hines or the staff? There be none. Let's take the first resolution. I would like to request a motion to accept the recommendation of the Permit Review Committee regarding the permit application for demolition for 906 West Fulton Market. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Commissioner Tolliver moved. Do I have a second?
Seconded by Commissioner Cox.
Okay, the roll call. Burns.
Yes.
Yakovich.
Yes.
Hughes.
Yes.
And I affirm the vote as chairman. And the next vote will be for, approving the permit application for demolition of 910 West Fulton Market. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Cox. Do I have a second?
Second. Yakovich.
Seconded by Yakovich. Roll call. Burns.
Yes.
Hughes. Commissioner Hughes. Commissioner Tolliver.
I made the motion. I did. Yes.
Yeah, you made the motion for 906. This is
I-
19. Yeah. Commissioner Hughes. I don't, she may be disconnected at this time. I will affirm the vote. So the motion carries. Do note that Commissioner Hughes did not vote in this resolution, but everybody else voted yes. So the motions for demolition carry. Thank you. Let's move to item number 9, which is the report on projects review at the November 5th, 2020 during the Permit Review Committee meeting, and Dijana will make the presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. So the Permit Review Committee reviewed 3 projects at its November 5th, 2020 meeting. All 3 projects were approved with conditions. This report, or the report summarizing the scope of the proposed projects and the committee's decisions, was included in your packet. And this report is for your information and for the record.
Thank you. Let me call on Larry to make the presentation on the permit decisions by the Commission staff for the month of November 2020.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the month of November, staff reviewed 146 permit applications. One of these applications related to projects reviewed by the Permit Review Committee. A total of 168 reviews were performed by staff, and the average number of days to issue the approval or corrections was 3.2 days. Staff also reviewed 3 sign applications during that time.
Thank you. All right, so any questions for the commission, from the commissioners to the staff?
Chairman Leon, I believe that there's also an update that Larry is going to prepare on 2 permits that were approved in November.
Okay, Larry.
Oh, gosh, I nearly forgot. Thank you very much.
So did I. So.
On February 10th, 2020, a fire broke out at 2235 South Michigan Avenue at the Pronto Cleaners building, which is a contributing building in the Motor Road District. An inspector from the Department of Buildings judged this to be a complete loss, and the remaining building was an imminent threat to life and safety. The Department of Buildings found that what remained after the fire was dangerous and hazardous, so a permit was received recently, and as required by the relevant code sections, the demolition application was released. In February of 2020, Historic Preservation staff was notified of the demolition of 10750 South Langley, a contributing building in the Pullman Historic District. Again, this was due to a determination of the Department of Buildings that the structure was an imminent threat to life and safety, and the demolition occurred on an emergency basis. A demolition permit application was received by staff in November and was released pursuant to the relevant sections of the code. And that's all I got.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions for Larry?
On the first property that Larry presented, was there any further updates on the cause of the fire?
I never really learned what the cause was. I'm not sure if it was ever really determined.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
All right. No, I just remember us having a lengthy conversation about negligence and, illegal activity. I wanted to know if we learned anything further on that.
Yeah, I have not, and I'm not sure if there's an investigation either.
Yeah, but let me clarify that statement. That's an interesting statement, Commissioner Hughes. Let's differentiate a fire, which could have been accidental or caused by somebody, versus the negligence of a property owner in maintaining a property. When we talk about negligence within the context of the landmark, is that the property owner does not take care of a property with the final goal of getting deteriorated and demolished. So I want to make sure that there is no misinterpretation about a fire being considered negligence.
Understood. Thanks.
Okay. That's it. I do have a few announcements here. The schedule of the 2021 Commission and Permit Review Committee meetings have been finalized, and the dates are posted on the Department of Planning and Development's website. I do want to acknowledge the Chicago Sun-Times editorial of November 27th, calling for landmark survey to protect Chicago's architectural and cultural heritage. Most of us who are well-versed with the role of landmarks are well aware of the existing survey, and yes, indeed, I agree with the editorial that a new survey should be done. But we also have to recognize that the resources to do this are limited at this time, and I call on the Department of Planning and Development to start thinking about how to allocate resources to conduct such survey. Of course, it will be great if foundations, advocacy groups, and civic-minded individuals and businesses join forces to make this happen. So let's start thinking about the best way of doing this and how we are going to complete this important effort. Preservation of our heritage is the role of everyone. So let's make sure that we invite those who are most interested in doing this to help the city accomplish it. So I don't know whether Commissioner Cox have any thoughts about this at this moment, but I think that it'd be important to start thinking about a new survey to document buildings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I read that editorial as well and was very pleased to see that our discussions here at the commission, filter into the general public and even generate editorials in support of things that we've talked about here. And this is a particular case in point. I appreciate you pointing out the complexity of undertaking that type of study and the years that it actually took to get to a document the last time it was done. So you really have to look carefully. It has to be a community effort. I'm reminded by the effort of the Miracle House, how many entities came together just to save one house. So you can imagine thousands of properties. So I think we certainly will look into what type of coalition, what type of support, what kind of timeline would be needed to even begin this type of process. And we'll be able to hopefully come back to the commission and tell you a little bit about our findings so that people move forward with these things with their eyes wide open.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yeah.
I don't know if you were going to make reference to the other event that happened this week.
No, but if you want to talk about it, that's fine.
Well, I mean, I think believe me, it's not. It was a very bittersweet day because myself and the staff, and frankly, this commission has invested hours and hours and hours in trying to advocate for what would have been the first Latino landmark district in the city, and certainly one of the largest and one of the most important. So the ordinance to create the landmark district failed unanimously in the zoning committee on December 1st. And it was notable that it was 18-0. And so the aldermen did not support it. And I think they did not support it in large part because of significant organized opposition to that. And certainly the alderman, Cicho Lopez, was not in favor of it. And quite frankly, I'm struck by the contrast of today of having Alderman Hopkins and Alderman Smith coming in and in support. You know, it's troubling to think that some communities that have aldermen who understand the relevance of historic preservation, well, they get to preserve their buildings. But other wards that don't have the support, well, their buildings go unprotected. So I think that we learned a lot in terms of engaging the public. We had 3 forums, you attended several of them, and I felt very proud of our staff for the effort that they put in to try to educate residents. First and foremost, I think Dijana Cuvalo has been amazing through this process. So was Matt Crawford and Eleanor Gorski. And then this commission, just want to thank you for the 2 years of advocacy and managing these assets. The work, I think we documented that only 1 building during the time of this proposed landmark district was demolished. And so it did its purpose. It was, in fact, a moratorium on demolition that now has been lifted, unfortunately. So, I made a commitment to the aldermen and to the community that we will work on whatever other tools we have in our toolbox to preserve this particularly significant Latino community. But it is, as I said, it was very, very challenging. I never thought, quite frankly, that it would happen under my watch, that I could not use the tools afforded us to protect communities. And so here we are. But I thought it would be important to acknowledge the work both of the staff and of this commission in advocating for the Pilsen neighborhood. And we will find a way forward. I'm confident in that.
Thank you, Commissioner. And let me say that when I read about it, I was very disappointed for the same reasons that you just stated. The staff worked really hard 2 years ago when we first started looking at this. So I commend the staff for doing the analysis and the report. But also what got lost in translation was that there was not that much opposition when we heard this transaction for the first time. I chaired the meeting and I remember distinctively moving to approve the designation because I saw the value. There were at most 2 or 3 people who testified against it, but the majority of the people, as well as the alderman at that time, supported the transaction. It is sad that we may end up with an area that will see a lot of demolition. I hope that it doesn't happen, but that's the course of development unless we take action to protect the area. So I was disappointed to hear that, and time will tell what the results is going to be. So I appreciate your effort. I participated with the meetings that you conducted as well. I thought that the department did a good job, but it's beyond our control at this point. So thank you, Commissioner.
And thank you all.
All right, so next announcement, if we could put the spotlight on Commissioner Yekovich. If we could highlight Commissioner Yekovich for a minute. Commissioner Yekovich, congratulations.
Yes.
You have a brand new baby girl.
Oh,
congratulations.
I do. Thank you so much. Thank you. I finally feel like I have it under control. It's 2 months old Friday, so
congratulations.
getting some sleep and my life back a little bit. So
that's why you are doing work and living somewhere else, I guess.
A lot of changes for me, yeah.
Congratulations. The best to you and your wife.
Thank you so much.
Finally, I'd like to make a statement about where we are right now. This has been an unreal kind of twilight zone year, something that we have never experienced in our lifetime. But life goes on, and we have to make the best out of this and remain hopeful that we will have a vaccine available to all very soon, and we will be able to gather in person once again. In the meantime, I wish everybody happy holidays.
Thanks so much.
And that's it. Unless other commissioners want to make a statement, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So
So
moved.
moved.
Do I have a second? Well, moved by Commissioner Burns, seconded by Commissioner Tolliver. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 The Permit Review Committee will begin in about 10 minutes. Let's do 3:15. In the meantime, please, commissioners, mute your microphone and stop your video. We'll reconvene at 3:15. Thank you.